junior year at Oberlin College, but I instantly knew that's what I wanted to do when I graduated. There wasn't a moment of hesitation. I just knew that's what I wanted to do. And as I reflect back on that time, it's clear to me that there were two factors in my upbringing that shaped that instant decision. The first was that I had been brought up in a Unitarian Sunday school, regularly attending every Sunday. And the values I was learning in my church community and in my family were perfectly aligned with the goals of the Peace Corps. In particular, the first and sixth UU principles aligned themselves harmoniously with the Peace Corps mission. President Kennedy's vision for building world peace resonated profoundly with we young people of that era. If I was lucky enough to be accepted by the Peace Corps, I knew all of those goals were challenges I wanted to tackle. The point here, though, is that my religious upbringing as a UU certainly influenced my decision to become a Peace Corps volunteer. The second factor in that instant decision was no doubt the influence of my mother. As a young woman, she had been very involved with international student work, and her interest in things international was ever present as I was growing up. Her influence was also imparted to all of us in the family. In fact, a few weeks after I entered Peace Corps training, my father went to Taiwan as a UNESCO advisor in museum education. And a year later, my sister Norma became a Peace Corps volunteer in Guatemala. For a while, each member of our family was living on a different continent. So indeed, after I completed college, I was invited to report to a Peace Corps training program in snowy upstate New York. And yes, training has changed since those days. I was in the first group of volunteers who were sent to be teachers in a small, very poor country in Central Africa, a country called Nyasaland. That little country would become the independent nation of Malawi during my Peace Corps tenure, so it was a very exciting time to be living there. When our Peace Corps group arrived in 1962, only 1% of all the teachers in the then Nyasaland had a college education, and our group of 42 volunteers was expected to double the number of secondary school teachers. We felt very needed. At that time, almost all the secondary schools that existed in Nyasaland were mission schools, and I, together with 4 other women, were assigned to teach at a Catholic boarding school for girls that had both a secondary school and a teacher training college. I taught English and math in the teacher training college, and it was a wonderful, rewarding experience. Though I had fully expected to live in a mud hut, to schlep my own wash water, and to sleep under a mosquito net, my living situation was almost an embarrassment of riches by Peace Corps standards. The sisters were so grateful to have more teachers for their school that they pooled their living allowances and built a nice brick house for us. It even had screened windows. That's unheard of. But that didn't diminish the richness of getting to know our students and working with the sisters to provide a good education for those lucky few who even had a chance for a secondary school education. Every day opened my eyes to what life was like for much of the world and how privileged my own life was. Throughout my Peace Corps experience, I put focus on the third Peace Corps goal, that of helping Americans understand other peoples. About 3 times a year, I wrote a long letter to friends and family, detailing what life was like and my impressions about the things I was experiencing. My mother then mimeographed those letters and sent them to family and friends and to our local newspaper. Peace Corps was new in those days, and there was a hunger to learn about it. Then, as I neared the end of my Peace Corps assignment, I began to think about how I could continue to work toward the goals of the Peace Corps once I returned home. How might I show the inherent worth and dignity of my students and every other person I'd worked with in Malawi, a UU value that was important to me? How might I make my Malawi experience more familiar and understandable to those who'd never even heard of the country? My solution was to prepare slideshows to help me share my experiences. In particular, I wanted to be able to share what I'd learned with American children. I hoped I could convey that though the Malawi children lived in circumstances quite different from their own, there were many things they shared in common. In the mid-1960s, there were scarce school materials about other cultures, and this seemed an important focus in terms of acting on the Peace Corps' third goal. So I wrote a story about a 6-year-old girl called Malia, and with the help of several of my students, I made arrangements with a family that lived in the village behind my house to take photographs to illustrate the story. Working together with this generous family, I was able to build a slideshow that showed what the family's daily life was like, what kind of chores the children were expected to do, what toys the children played with, and what school life was like. And then upon my return to the United States, I made a concerted effort to visit elementary schools and share my Malia from Malawi slideshow. I probably visited over 100 school classrooms, and it was exciting to see our American children discover both how privileged they were, but also how much they shared in common with Malia and her brothers and sisters. I love this interaction with the elementary school kids, and I'd like to believe I may have had some impact. I didn't realize it at the time, but creating that slideshow had a strong impact on my own life as well. Storytelling through photography and videography became a hobby I've pursued ever since. I also didn't realize at the time how much my Peace Corps experience would shape the balance of my life. Many opportunities arose simply because I had been a Peace Corps volunteer. Like most of us, a chunk of my life is focused on working and raising a family. But after retiring from my job with the county, I wanted nothing more than to live in the circumstances similar to my Peace Corps years. And I was lucky because it worked out. I had the opportunity to spend a year teaching at a university in China, an experience that was almost more Peace Corps-like than Peace Corps. And to do an extensive trek with my husband in the Himalayan mountains of Nepal, exploring places that other Peace Corps friends had lived and loved. And then, 36 years after my departure from Malawi, I returned to find former students and to do volunteer work in an AIDS orphan program that had been begun by former Peace Corps volunteers. As always, these experiences included riding on third-class buses, eating indigenous street food, finding ways to interact with local people, and bringing the story back through video documentaries to share with others and to keep working on that third Peace Corps goal. No doubt about it, once a Peace Corps volunteer, always a Peace Corps volunteer. It's been a wonderful journey.
I actually was wondering if we could have the other people in the congregation this morning who were also Peace Corps volunteers stand up so we can see those people. So, thank you, thank you. So they're out there. There's more of them than you may expect. In January of 1993, the bus dropped me off at Makande Secondary School in rural Zimbabwe. I'd had about 3 months of training in the capital city, so I wasn't completely terrified of standing in front of a class of high school students. I hadn't learned much Shona, but that was okay because my students and I were really only allowed to speak English at the school. I had my propane stove, my kerosene lamp, and a couple of big buckets to carry water from across the street. I figured I was as ready as I ever was going to be. And I figured it out. I figured out how to get food and how to work my stove and the lamp. I could boil water each morning for coffee in my bath. I figured out how to keep my students interested, or at least busy. I even managed to keep a supply of C batteries so I could listen to my radio and that precious few cassettes that I had brought from home. I was teaching math and a little bit of science alongside 9 or 10 Zimbabwean teachers. We all lived right there on the school grounds in a couple of brick houses. None of us were from Makonde. Most of them had just recently graduated from Teachers College, and so they were assigned out to a rural school. Looking through my scrapbook, I found this report from when Mr. Tari, my headmaster, came to observe one of my classes. It's mostly positive. He commented that I was confident, but I forgot to introduce him to my students. And my work on the chalkboard wasn't very neat, and I can tell you that continues to this day. I also have here a letter of reprimand from my headmaster. I'd not yet covered my class roster. There was always a certain amount of neatness that was required in everything at the Zimbabwe school, and I had a hard time adapting to that. Mr. Tari loved me. He loved having me at Makonde. It showed the community that it was a developing school. It had a European teacher, which sort of felt like a mascot sometimes. But I think his deepest wish was that I would keep my shoes polished. As I settled in, like most every Peace Corps volunteer, I spent a lot of time thinking, why am I here? Peace Corps' first goal was to provide experts to aid in the development of the people of Zimbabwe. I was an educated, but maybe somewhat lightly trained math teacher, which is an important job. However, it was hard to see the effect I was having beyond the few students in my classes. The second goal was to help them know America better. Well, American culture had a very strong influence on Zimbabwean society already. That was the summer that the Whitney Houston movie, The Bodyguard, had come out. And Whitney Houston was everywhere. She was so popular, and her song, I Will Always Love You, played constantly on Zimbabwean radio. Not only the Whitney Houston version of it, but also the original Dolly Parton version. Somehow even American country music translated over to a large segment of Zimbabweans. And there was one night in Zimbabwe when the national soccer team was playing an important qualifying match for the World Cup. So one of my colleagues had a TV that he could run off of a motorcycle battery. And he agreed on this special occasion to set it up so that all of us could watch. And we were excited, so we all gathered early. The game hadn't started yet, but we took advantage of this rare opportunity to watch the TV. So picture it. There's about a dozen of us. We're all set up outside of his window where the TV was set. We're sitting in the wheelbarrow and on little wooden stools and things. It was dark. It was rural Zimbabwe, 50 miles from the nearest bank or post office or a paved road. And there we sat, watching the Golden Girls. I don't have any idea what they figured out or made of it, but they were watching. A lot of times when I met Zimbabweans, they would ask me, why have you come to dark Africa? On one level, this was a sincere inquiry. Why would you, as a privileged American, want to come here? He's from Zimbabwe. He's proud of his country, but he would still rather teach at a school where there was a little bit of hope. somewhere away from this backwards rural community, or at least a place with electricity. He often was trying to move to Botswana or South Africa, where the pay was better. Finding a way to travel to Los Angeles or Washington, that would be a dream. They often told me my parents or my wife and children back home must really miss me. Unless maybe I was there looking for a beautiful Zimbabwean wife. That they could understand. And unfortunately, there was a tinge in this of acceptance that in the African people were fated to be poor, and America was some reason chosen to be rich. It was an inferiority complex about being the country where not everyone could afford a TV and no one ever got to star in a Hollywood movie. But on another level, this question was being asked sort of as this to say, aren't you afraid of dark Africa? Where they were reflecting back their own image that they saw in European media and in the residues of the colonial structures. Africa, this scary place of mystery, jungles and swamps, wild animals and inscrutable natives, dark, impenetrable, impossible to understand. Yet the guy sitting next to me knew how absurd that characterization was. We weren't in the middle of an impenetrable jungle. We were probably in line at the post office. He was telling me that he knew I was supposed to be scared of them, or that I must have come there because I thought they were pitiful. And it forced me to see the world that they were seeing, and to see how they saw. They weren't trying to save their country or create peace throughout the world or develop anything. They were just trying to get ahead, just like anyone else, find a job, help out their family, maybe in some way honor their ancestors. And it was obvious to both of us that Africa was anything but dark. It was full of these people, struggling against a troubling history to be sure, but full of potential and ambition. So the real effect of being a Peace Corps volunteer was how it changed me. It didn't change me into a globe-trotting do-gooder, but it did make me aware of all the people around the world, how their circumstances differ, but their basic humanity is the same, how they are so much more aware of us than we may be of them. And it's the image of those people riding on the bus that I think of whenever I see the principle to honor the inherent worth and dignity of all people.
Since returning from the Peace Corps in April of this year, I have talked to many people about my experience. The most common responses I hear are either, "Wow, you're amazing, I could never do that," or "I always wanted to do the Peace Corps, but never did." Growing up at Live Oak and later at a Christian church both fundamentally shaped who I am as a person. And I believe that because of this, I was destined to join the Peace Corps. I was taught many things that are part of the core of who I am, with the most important probably being the first principle of the UU Church, speaking of the worth and dignity of every person. This principle doesn't say the worth and dignity of every person within our borders. It's a simple phrase that encapsulates such a big idea. Today I have decided to share a few anecdotes that will hopefully demonstrate both the first principle and the third goal of Peace Corps that Barbara talked about. A little background on my service. I worked in the town of El Higo, Panama, as an English teacher, working with Panamanian English teachers on curriculum development and giving them more dynamic activities, as well as actually teaching kindergarten through 8th grade, Monday through Friday. You can see a picture of the house where I lived on the screen. It was next to the telephone booths, so I could hear everyone's conversations when they were on the phone. It was very interesting. And another picture of the view from my house. I also went to the beach occasionally, which wasn't too bad. I lived in a town called La Loma, which was about a 45-minute walk away from El Higo, where I taught. This town was much smaller, with about 150 residents, who soon became my family. My first story is about one of my neighbors in La Loma, Charito. Okay, her real name wasn't Charito, it was her nickname. But everyone called her that, so I honestly didn't even know her real name. She is the girl next to me in the picture with the cake on her face. From the first week I moved into my tiny house, she curiously came over to see who La Gringa que Camina Mucha, the white girl who walks a lot, was. She was 15 years old when I moved in. Not having the money to pay for transportation and books, nor the interest to go to high school, she dropped out of school and spent most of her time taking care of her 8 younger siblings, or 4 nieces and nephews. She lived in a 1-bedroom house with 17 other family members. But this story is not meant to make you pity her. From the start, I saw a defiance and a spark that I didn't see in all of my neighbors. She was determined to do more than her 3 older sisters, who were all in their late teens with at least 1 child. I told her about the camp that Peace Corps puts on every year to teach teens about making healthy decisions, getting into college, and family planning. She immediately was interested. I told her that unfortunately, she needed to be attending high school to go. So she got a job, saved her money, and started going to night classes eventually. Because of all this effort she put in, I of course invited her to go to camp. I was fortunate enough to help with 5 of these camps during my time in Panama. And the difference between the teens who arrived on Monday and who left on Friday is profound and humbling. The obstacles Charito had to overcome just to go to camp were big. But everyone is deserving of more than one chance. I could have given up on her and seen her as a soon-to-be teenage mom, as the majority of the teens in my town were. But regardless of one's place in life, they have the right to be treated with worth and dignity. I can't say that she is now in university studying to be a doctor or something, but I am happy to say that she now dreams bigger than being a single mom living in La Loma in that same 1-room house forever. My other story is about the library we created. Although this helped the community and school a great deal, it was also an incredibly rewarding experience for me. Over my first year in Panama, I noticed there was a huge problem with illiteracy throughout the school and community. I decided that a library would benefit everyone a lot. With the help of the faculty at the school and community members, I was able to apply for a U.S. government grant to buy books and supplies for a library. But this is not what the main story is about. This story is about the kids who learned so much from these books. I really enjoyed watching their interest in reading increase over the year I had the books. As soon as the first shipment came into my tiny house, the kids were over every day to look at the books. Some days, they wouldn't even care about talking to me. They just wanted to look at the books. My little neighbor Isabella, who was 3 at the time, would come over every day to have me read The Very Hungry Caterpillar in Spanish to her, at least 5 times a day. One day, when she came over to read with me, I happened to just be leaving to walk to a town nearby. But I told her that she could take the book home and read it with her abuelita, her grandmother. When I came home later that day, my neighbors told me through laughter the story of how Isabella had actually read the story to them because she had memorized it from reading it all the times with me. They were shocked that she would be able to do such a thing. I will never forget the days in my house before I organized the books and put them in the school library, when the kids would come over and lie on my floor reading stories to one another and laughing at the pictures. My 1-room house that was full of books became filled with laughter, love, and learning when these kids came over. And that's the important part. These kids deserved a good future. They deserved the chance to learn to read and expand their world further than their small town through books and learning. I may not be able to change the world single-handedly, but I feel blessed to have the opportunity to make a mark and to do my part to acknowledge the worth and dignity of every person. From this experience, I've learned a lot. One of the main things being that the people in my community probably won't remember me most for the library, or the seminars I gave, the recycling group I started, or the English, exercise, or nutrition class I taught. They will remember me for the small things. The time my parents came to visit and danced with my neighbors. The time I danced in the traditional dress. The time I hosted a Halloween party for all the kids. The time the kids and I collected recycling, turned it in for money, and went to the zoo in a town an hour away for the first time. And then I took them to a restaurant for the first time after. All the fun times diving in the river. And these are the things I want to be remembered for. I want them to remember me as a friend, a daughter, and a neighbor. And maybe occasionally the weird gringa. As someone who showed them love and became part of their family. My last day in Panama, I got a tattoo of my favorite Mother Teresa quote that says, "We can do no great things, only small things with great love." I think this really sums up my service in Panama. A lot of things, small things done with great love. Although not everyone gets the opportunity to go and serve in another country, I encourage each of you to go out and live life doing small things with great love. If we all do this, I think we can transform the world. Thank you.